Hello. For this assignment on media and technology, we had a choice. We could either do a video discussion or we could actually do a handwritten paper. I've decided to go with the video discussion. So basically, this is pay-per-view, maybe? Okay. Anyway, my topic for today is the television, or more specifically, the television of the 1950s. And what makes television so interesting is the fact that even though it's relatively young, it has had an incredible impact on our society and our culture based on the abilities of what it could do, what it could transmit, and obviously what it would have in the content, or what we would refer to as the vessel. So what I've got for us today is I have a PowerPoint that I'd like to use, and dealing with the aspects of the television, of course. And we'll start right from the beginning. And we start with the happy days of the 1950s. Now, there was a television show in the 70s, which was called Happy Days, which was basically set in the 1950s. And it showed what Americans' way of life was at that time frame, or during that time frame. So what I intend to do today is I'm going to look at three different areas. We're going to set some sails, obviously. We'll also speak clearly, and then, of course, we'll wrap it up with where we are. Now, the idea behind all of this stuff starts with why the 1950s. Where was the purpose behind the 1950s? One of the main reasons for this is that in 1929, we had the crash of the stock market, which sent the United States into what was referred to as the Great Depression. The Great Depression lasted for roughly about 12 years until, unfortunately, we got drawn into World War II and the war effort and everything like that. When the war ended in 1945, the troops had come home and everything like that. And for the next 5 or 6 years, we had a very unique economic boom, and it led us into the 1950s. Now, when we think about technology at the time, most of the war effort had dissolved all of the technology, whether it was for certain things that we needed for the troops or certain things that we needed. There was a time of rationing and everything like that. So technology that was being focused by engineers and people working on different things, they were focused more on it in the war effort. Now that the war was over, the opportunity was to use it in a more public or commercial setting. And so from the 1950 to 1960, we see an expansion of a little device that was known as the television. And at the beginning of that decade, we had about 10% of the houses, only really basically the affluent or the rich would have it. And by the end of the 1950s, better than 2/3 of homes would have at least one. So we could see the expansion of that particular technology. We also see the element of additional pieces of content, grammar, and obviously environment that really made the 1950s kind of the springboard into what we look at as television today. So, according to Meyerowitz article, Understanding Media, he looks at three basic metaphors, and the one was medium as a vessel. Now, according to his article, we look at that more as the content. What is it that we are sending through this particular medium? What is it that's coming out there? Maybe one of the easiest ones to analyze, because we can look at it, it's almost like a tangible product. The second thing that he brings up is what we call the medium of a language, or in the article talks about grammar or how we tell that particular information. And then, of course, the third one is the medium as environment. And that is what makes those environments physically different from other environments of the time frame. So as we look through this material, we're going to look at those three areas specifically in regards to television to give us kind of a overview of what happened in the 1950s and also how it affected our society and culture at the same time. Okay, so we'll start with TV as a vessel. And again, Meyerowitz talks about that in his 1999 article of the metaphor. It means as a content. In other words, what is it that we are sending out to our viewership? What is going on? In the 1950s, we see quite a unique movement in the actual content that was coming into television homes. Okay. According to the article, The Affluent Society of the 1950s, what a lot of the material that we would see was not necessarily propaganda. Now, that's an entirely different subject that comes up with during the war effort. This was not necessarily propaganda. It was more about a way of life, or the way of life, maybe the idealistic life. Remember, we didn't have the separation anymore. In the 1940s, you had the troops out in the different war fronts, whereas other people were at home trying to support them. So we had this division of labor to where you had some people in one place, some people somewhere else. We are now back together again. And because of that, the idea of the nuclear family was really kind of major. We also started to see the fact of the kind of the traditional family where the husband would go to work and then the wife would stay home and raise the children. So we start to see that unfold with our television programs at that time. So the content was very, very heavy in those areas. And we see a little bit this in different things. According to the ushistory.org website, it deals with the land of television. And it talks about, again, those 2/3 of households having a TV. But we also see a couple of very major uses of that with the way that we created our entertainment sources. They're in competition at this time to movies. Movies had really kind of exploded from the roaring 20s into the 30s and even into the 40s. So movies were the big screen and then television was the little screen. And so what you had on those television programs was stuff that you wouldn't see in the actual movie theater. In my book, Appreciating Film, which was published in 2021, we discuss in there the ideas about television and the way that it would use some of the resources that movies did, but things that maybe wouldn't sell in a movie theater, but we could put them on television. We see the variety show, we see the talk show, we see what was referred to as the sitcom, which was a situational comedy where we would see a particular conflict or a particular situation develop, and then it would be wrapped up in 30 minutes. And so that's what mainly went on in the 1950s. And what made that so popular is it was giving people an idea of what it should look like. And we start to see that in society. We start to see the way that people would, it was that suburban middle class feel that was also starting to expand. We see people moving outside of the cities. And so your content of your television shows replicated what was going on in society, and society also replicated what they saw on television. It was a two-way street at that point. The second area that we went in is what we call the medium as a language, or television as a language. Now, in Meyerowitz's article, he talks about the grammar. In other words, what is it that we're actually saying or telling in that particular information. Again, we go back to President Truman and President Eisenhower, who were in the 1950s there. They understood the aspects of what we would refer to as the quick, uh, let people know what's going on. Let's have that. It had a quite of an impact on us as we looked at society in general. They felt comfortable, they felt safe, and that was really the idea. As we look at a book called "Understanding the Media and Culture: The Introduction to Mass Communication," that was what really was making everything very popular. We felt safe. We felt the war was over. And so now we have this economic boom. And we also start to see people really kind of enjoy their leisure time. And because of the leisure time, we're able to use the entertainment of television as a way to maybe unwind at the end of the day and also to achieve our information. We start to see the news programs be a little bit more popular at this point. We also noticed that the variety show, which was something that was incredibly popular because it gave us something new every time we watched it. It wasn't the same old, same old. So we started to see that as well. We also have to remember the 1950s, we start to see the rise of rock and roll, right? Elvis Presley in 1956 went on the Ed Sullivan Show and he sang Hound Dog, and well, as they say, the rest is history. We also notice in 1958 the first ever televised NFL championship game. And I know that sounds kind of strange when we think about that in a film, in a class about technology, but it was the first time we put football on television. And because of that, it changed our culture incredibly. It it's almost like a ritual on Sundays that you that's what people do. That's, they get together and they make food and they all sit around and everybody wears their jersey of their favorite team and you watch this, and there's an unofficial holiday at the end of the season which is called the Super Bowl, and people get involved in it and people dive into it and they deal with. So it's how we're telling that particular story now as a live audience and everything like that. Now, when McLuhan wrote a book called The Critical Evaluations of Culture, and he talks in that book at different things. He talks a variety of different elements, but one of them is the switch that we see from radio to television advertising. And that changes with the language. We see that change with the language because it's now we can tell this not only auditorily, but we can tell it visually. We can show that. We can show this particular product, or we can show people using this particular product. Unlike what we saw in radio, where we just described the product, in television, we can show the product. We can show this particular product to people. So both of those really make a very large impact on us. And as we wrap it up, as we talk about the environment, what is physically different about a television set than, say, the movies at the time frame, radio, or some of the other mediums that were out there, your newspapers, or maybe some sort of town crier? There wasn't that many of them anymore, but you could still have that. You still had live productions of theatrical plays, and you had live productions of theatrical performances. So the environment of television allowed a visual and an auditorily significant change technologically. And that's what makes that physically different. The only thing it really couldn't really develop was the sense of smell. You couldn't get that. Even though Julia Child, which she really wouldn't get onto television until the 60s, she started that incredible movement of the cooking show, so to speak. And even though you couldn't smell the incredible food that she was making, you could see it and you could see the savory nature of it, which is different from radio and obviously much different from some sort of newspaper. So the physical difference, which was Mayor Roritz's his last metaphor that he brought up in his article in 1999, was the fact that you have a physically different environment to allow that. And you also got a chance to see a lot of different people together in the same place. And I think that that's what's really very important when we look at the technology. When we would listen to the radio, even in today's society, listening to the radio is a very personal thing. It's mainly done in the car. It's mainly done in a way that is separate from somebody else. Whether if you're driving in a transportation type of setting, such as a train or a bus or an airplane, a lot of people put their headphones in and then they listen to not necessarily radio, if you will, but an auditorily significant type of program. And that changes the way that we look at it. As we can see with television, we don't watch television a lot of times by ourselves. Yeah, we do, but not in the same manner of radio. We maybe sit around, and again, like we mentioned earlier, the football game in 1958 changed the way that the culture changed. We started to watch in groups and we would cheer in groups, things like that. We would all get together and watch a particular show together. Now, and even if we didn't have that, and again, we go all the way back to the affluent society, the 50s, or even if we discuss the understanding of media and culture, both of those sources discuss the idea of the connection that we had between each other when we had television. Who watched the latest such and such on television, or did you see what happened here, or did you see what something happened there? One of the biggest things of very recent history was the situation that happened at the Oscars at the end of March. The minute that happened, that particular situation with Will Smith and Chris Rock, the minute that happened, it exploded through media. It happened on live television. And yeah, there's a delay. We know that there's a few second delay. But the minute it happened, I got 2 text messages from students that said to me, hey, did you see what happened? Do you realize? And they showed me the little meme and everything like that. And that kind of exploded. And so what changed with the movement of television in the 50s specifically was it changed our culture. It became part of our society. Everybody had a television, and therefore everybody spent time using the television, and therefore everybody had a similar content, and they could speak a similar language, and they could still have the same type of environment. So television certainly changed the way that our culture has changed over the years. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your comments in return.